We are shifting gears slightly from the president of a country to the leader of an army. And Lieutenant General Ben Hodges is, I'm sure, known to all of you through the media of some great work that he has done to reinforce Article 5 and the collective defense commitment of NATO, acting in a U.S. capacity ahead of the U.S. Army Europe. I have a bunch of questions here, but I want to start with one that I'll phrase a little differently than we put over dinner last night. But one of the things that was visible in the media not too long ago was you riding on American armored vehicles in the border town of Narva, which is the Estonian-Russian border, in a parade there. And I just have to ask, so what was the point of that?
Well, Ambassador, thank you. I was not personally in that vehicle, although I wish I had been. Estonia is an ally. The U.S. ambassador to Estonia asked me if our soldiers would participate in an Estonian National Day parade there in Narva. And of course, if the ambassador asked for it, that represents U.S. policy, and I absolutely would support an ambassador. But also, it's important to note there were 4 other countries also there. We had British soldiers, Portuguese soldiers, Dutch, I think, as well as Estonian. And it's important to demonstrate commitment and to offer assurance, and so that's why they were there.
That's great. And that brings up the broader point. In response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea, NATO has taken on a lot of activity, particularly in reinforcing the visibility and the credibility of the Article 5 collective defense commitment. And I wonder if you would describe some of those steps and what you see looking ahead and how you view Article 5.
Well, first of all, as much as we would like to see Russia take on a leadership role around the globe, their conduct, their use of force to change internationally recognized sovereign borders of European countries, as they did in Georgia and as they've done in Ukraine, is unacceptable behavior in the 21st century. The 28 nations of NATO at the Wales Summit agreed that that was unacceptable behavior. And so even though each of the 28 members of NATO might have had a different view of what the real threat is, all 28 nations agreed that that was unacceptable behavior. And so the outcome of the Wales Summit was a decision to provide assurance to those allies who are closest to Russia, such as the Baltic countries, Poland, Czech, Slovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria, but also that the alliance needed to adapt, that we needed to be able to be more responsive. So the creation of the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, for example, the creation of the NATO force integration units, which would help facilitate the arrival of NATO forces, and an overall commitment to improving the speed with which NATO forces could assemble. And that speed is really important because that gives our political leadership some options. If we demonstrate capability to get to a place quickly, that offers a better deterrent effect to what Russia is doing. And I think then we have the possibility to have a better deterrent effect versus having to respond to an attack or a crisis of little green men that's already underway. So that's the increase in the number of exercises, the practice of movement around Europe is an important part of that assurance as well as deterrence.
Okay, so NATO is going to defend itself. But what does that mean for a country like Georgia, which is partially occupied, or a country like Ukraine, where there's an active conflict still going on? What lesson should they take out of this?
Okay, so NATO, of course, was created at its core is about collective defense of its members. Attack on one is an attack on all, Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. But the fact that NATO has responded to and the EU has responded to what Russia has done in Ukraine, I think is an example or a manifestation of the recognition that we need stability throughout Europe. Georgia, as a part of Europe, is part of that framework where we want to see stability and security as well. We have 300 American soldiers that are in Ukraine right now, part of a training mission at the invitation of Ukraine. Unlike the Russians who are there in Ukraine not at the invitation, American soldiers are there in Yavoriv Training Center near the city of Lviv. We've been there since the spring, training Ukrainian Ministry of Interior soldiers, and in November that'll transition to training of Ministry of Defense soldiers. Our great ambassador there, Ambassador Pyatt, has explained that the United States commitment there to Ukraine will continue in terms of training. This is quite a commitment, but also hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment, up-armored Humvees, personal body protection, and extensive support for casualties, medical supplies. And of course, we're joined by the UK, Lithuania, and Canada in this training mission. So you have 4 NATO countries that are inside Ukraine helping Ukrainian soldiers defend their own country, as well as providing equipment and other assistance. And I would expect, in fact, I'm very confident that other NATO countries will continue inside Ukraine. Russia, I am sure, does not intend to, first of all, they don't have the capability, other than with nuclear weapons, they don't have the capability to take all of Ukraine. Their objective is to keep Ukraine unstable, a mess, to undermine the Poroshenko regime so that it cannot join the EU, that it could not join NATO, and I think probably also to create this sort of buffer zone to which the Russians think that they are entitled.
And if I may, I'm going to add my own 2 cents to that answer as well, which is if NATO won't defend itself, it won't defend anybody. If NATO does defend itself, it's a factor in security for everybody. If I could ask about the future of the U.S. force presence. What you're describing is presence in the Baltic states, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, pre-positioning of equipment in some places, such as Poland and the Baltic states. Yet we've seen a significant reduction in the U.S. force presence in Europe overall, losing a couple of brigades over time. What do you see in terms of the sustainability of this U.S. force presence in Europe?
We have 30,000 American soldiers, U.S. Army, that are forward stationed in Europe. My expectation is that we're going to maintain that for quite some time, even though the size of the Army overall, as you have seen, is going to be reduced. But this is a commitment by the United States to stability and security in Europe. The United States, not only do we have treaty obligations, and also I think an obligation on moral grounds for supporting nations, their right to self-determination, to include Georgia, but also our own strategic interests are tied to stability and security in Europe. The economic relationship between the United States and the EU is about 5 times greater than it is anywhere else in the world. So if for no other reason, our own strategic or economic interests are tied to stability and security in Europe. Access to markets, the ability of nations to move energy as well as people. Again, part of why Georgia is so important, its strategic location, access from the Caspian Sea region into Europe, helping to assure freedom of movement in the Black Sea. These are important roles that Georgia plays. So the size of the Army, I think, is going to remain about what it is. There is no congressman that represents Wiesbaden or no senator that represents Bavaria, so it's unlikely, no American senator, so that it's unlikely that we would get any member of Congress to agree to move troops from the U.S. back to Europe on a permanent, and I understand that. So the United States will use rotational forces much the way we do in Central Command in the Middle East. That's how we get above the 30,000 to get the capability of the armored vehicles that you saw here in Georgia back in May. Those are troops from the states that came over for a period of time, used equipment, and we have brought the heavy equipment back into Europe now because of what Russia has done to improve that speed and to improve our ability to provide assurance and deterrence. So that's how we're going to do this.
And maybe you'd like to say a word about the cooperation with Georgia. We had a significant military exercise here in May. It's a planned annual activity looking ahead to next May. What's been the nature of the development of the bilateral security relationship?
So the military relationship with Georgia is one that's based on trust, on shared hardship, on service together in Iraq and Afghanistan. So to even call it a partnership would really be an understatement. It's so much more than just a partnership. It's the trust that comes from going into combat together. 30 Georgian soldiers have been killed, almost 300 Georgian soldiers wounded in Afghanistan. Georgia provides the second largest number of troops to the Resolute Support Mission without caveat. They have very important missions to perform in Afghanistan. I just spoke with Sakir. He and General Campbell, the commander in Afghanistan, both praise the quality of the soldiers from Georgia. So that creates a bond that goes so far beyond a partnership, and it's part of the reason that I am here, because of that commitment. The exercises that we've done in Georgia recently, the quantity of our participation, or as well as the frequency, is increasing. Number one, it's important for us to demonstrate that commitment to Georgia, but it's also the training value for us to show how fast we can move to different parts of Europe is an important thing for us to continue to practice. Noble partner this past May, we had an airborne company that came from Italy, U.S. Army in Italy in Vicenza, and then a heavy company with armored vehicles that was part of the rotational force that came from Bulgaria on a ferry across the Black Sea, landed in Georgia, moved by train right into the training area. These are difficult things to do, so Georgian support for that kind of deployment was important, obviously. But what a great opportunity for our soldiers to train in this kind of environment. And I'm already looking forward to next year's Noble Partner, May of next year. We will increase our participation, looking for opportunities to put more soldiers here in that exercise with Georgia, and put the American soldiers under command of a Georgian commander. Great experience, and of course that's a demonstration of trust. I think the people of Georgia are well served by the leadership from your Minister of Defense and your Chief of Defense. Not only is it skilled leadership, but also transparent, which is an important part, I think, of civilian leadership over the military. That sort of transparency is something that I applaud.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. I see a hand or two here in the front. We'll start with Ambassador Ian Bond, former UK ambassador to Latvia and former political counselor in Washington, now with the Center for European Reform.
Thank you very much. General, thank you very much for your presentation. Talked a lot about America's commitment to Europe, but I wonder, what is the American view on Europe's commitment to Europe? Despite the decision at the Wales summit to move towards 2% of GDP being spent on defence, most European countries are not actually showing any progress towards that. And even my own country is using a certain amount of conjuring tricks to keep up the 2% threshold. So is there a risk to America's political support for Europe Europeans don't look as though they care enough themselves.
I'll repeat the question only because of the sound quality. It was brilliantly phrased. The question is, you mentioned the U.S. commitment to Europe's security, but how does the U.S. view Europe's commitment to its own security, and with particular reference to the willingness to spend sufficiently on defense, whether in continental Europe or in the U.K.?
Hey, Ambassador, thank you for the question. Absolutely, there's a risk if the American public and if the American Congress does not see European nations investing in their own security. Of course, there's a risk of it becoming more and more difficult for the United States to spend, invest, deploy soldiers to Europe. But let me say for just a second, set that aside, that does not change our strategic interest in Europe. So even if European countries perhaps are not doing all that they should, that does not change the fact that our economic relationship with Europe, and frankly, my president has been very clear, we are never going to do anything by ourselves. We've learned that lesson. Other countries know things that we don't know about regions, whether it's Africa or the Middle East or Asia. The allies that we can always count on the most come from Europe. That people that will go with us, and you think of every difficult security situation the United States has encountered in the last 5 years, the first thing our president has done is turn to the alliance, turn to the EU, turn to other nations to help us deal with that. So it's in our interest that European security capabilities are strong, capable, and that we are interoperable. Now, I do want to say, I think it would be an inaccurate characterization that, although it's held by many Americans, that, why don't the Germans do more? Why don't the Brits do more? When in fact, you are doing a lot more. UK's recent decision to maintain their spending for the next several years at the 2% obviously is very welcome. The British Army, led by General Sir Nick Carter, Chief of the General Staff, exceptional commander. He is making sure that the British Army is organized to deal with all the different threats and responsibilities it has to encounter. He's personally invested in making sure that the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force is a capable manifestation of the alliance commitment. So in the British Army alone, I see that. British Navy, I think having 2 aircraft carriers, again, a huge commitment that I'm glad to see. Germany is getting back into the tank business, which I think is great. They're re-equipping their armor units with Leopard tanks. The new chief of the German Army, under the leadership of Frau von der Leyen, also the defense minister, have stepped up to take on more responsibility in the Baltics and in Poland, increased number of German soldiers in exercises, a modernization effort that's underway. To me, this is very encouraging. And I think it's also fair to highlight, or important to highlight, the leadership of the Bundeskanzlerin, Frau Merkel, keeping the EU together. The economic aspect of power is at least as important as the military aspect of power. And so to keep the EU together with the sanctions against Russia, but also making sure that the EU provides funding for the Ukrainian government, these are all important aspects of security in Europe. Italy, of course, their top 5 security issues are immigration. What's coming from Africa, what Italy is having to absorb a huge amount of illegal immigrants. And so their focus obviously is going to be there, as well as other southern European countries. A difficult challenge, but yet we are all sticking together, which I think is important.
Great, thank you. In the third row here, I see a question.
Vladislav Gol, member of Ukrainian Parliament. Dear Mr. General, thank you very much for your presentation. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for all of your support, help, and assistance currently rendered to Ukraine. However, I would like to raise the question regarding your position on topical issue right now in my country on supply of lethal defense weapon to Ukraine. Thank you very much.
I think that was clear. Lethal defensive equipment to Ukraine. How do you view that now?
So, 2 or 3 points. The fact that you're from the Parliament, I am very impressed with Rada's interest in establishing legislative oversight over the military. The Ministry of Defense, I think, has the largest budget this year that it's had in a long time. And I know that some of the leaders inside the Rada have expressed an interest in what in the U.S. we would call congressional oversight of the Ministry of Defense. I think that's a manifestation of a desire to be transparent, to ensure good governance is something that we would applaud and support. So my compliments to you on that. Ukraine has, in the past, had one of the largest militaries in Europe. It has significant military capability, industrial capability, and an increasing budget. So I don't think that there's any special weapon that's made in the United States or Britain or Germany that would solve the problem. Providing weapons by itself is not a strategy. Now, perhaps providing weapons will become a part of a future strategy, but to me, it's so much more important that we take a look at, what is the environment that the West, what's the end state that the West is willing to support. Keeping the alliance together, maintaining alliance unity in this is of paramount importance. And the fact is, there are some countries that would have such difficulty with that, accepting that it's more important that the alliance sticks together in its deterrence of Russia and its assurance and keeping the EU together, that I don't know that providing weapons changes the strategic calculus in such a way that we could all support that.
All right, thank you. And we are going to have a session later on devoted solely to Ukraine, where I think we will hear some alternative points of view. There was a woman in the middle on this side over here who had a question.
There's a lady in the back also.
There was one on this side, yes. She had her hand up first. Please stand up and they'll find you.
I think you...
Thank you, yes. And now we need a microphone.
Thank you. My name is Senator Tbilisi. I'm a director of Center for Strategic Communication here in Georgia, former Georgian ambassador to the European Union. I have a question for the General. Following the debate in Brussels following Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and then following moving the frontier inside the NATO, it was clear to me that the wedge of division was sort of driven within the alliance. In a way, Russia has moved the aggression inside the NATO countries by abducting the Estonian security officers and other acts. And many voices inside the NATO started saying that it was a mistake to accept the Baltic countries into the NATO, and now you have to live up to the consequences. I'm wondering whether, how do you see this debate moving forward? Is Russia's aggression weakening the position of those in NATO who support membership of Ukraine in Georgia, or just the opposite, weakening the position of our supporters? And what needs to happen between now and Warsaw to strengthen the position of Georgia's supporters? Because Warsaw summit will be fundamentally important for our country and for its future.
Thank you. I'm going to try to rephrase or to get that for the audience. It's very difficult to hear because of the sound quality. But if I understand it correctly, the question is, Russia has demonstrated a willingness to be more aggressive over time. whether it is kidnapping an Estonian intelligence officer or through the actions it's taken in Ukraine. Has this aggressiveness actually been successful in pushing NATO back from its orientation toward further enlargement? And what needs to happen for countries like Ukraine or Georgia for that to turn around? Did I get that right? Okay.
I would say that the alliance today is probably stronger and closer than it has been in the past 20, 25 years. The manifestation of that coming out of the Wales Summit, the agreement to provide assurance, as well as to adapt the alliance's structures, to me has been impressive. More and more nations are reinvesting into their own security structure. I think that you're right, the Russians, in terms of aggressive behavior, the snap exercises that are upwards of 60, 70, 80,000 soldiers without any sort of notification, the investment that they have made in Kaliningrad to deny access into the Baltic Sea, and the investment they've made in Crimea to deny access into the Black Sea. The very irresponsible language where they talk about Denmark as a nuclear target or Sweden as a nuclear target, Romania as a nuclear target is completely irresponsible. And so I think their credibility is really, they're undermining it themselves. And I think people in Europe, certainly in the United States, are understanding that. Secondly, their record of not supporting or allowing European security structures to do their job. The EU monitoring mission in Georgia is routinely disrupted by the Russians so that they cannot monitor the 6 points of the Sarkozy agreement here in Georgia, and the Russians are violating routinely all 6 points of that agreement, just the way the Russians have not allowed OSCE to monitor the Minsk agreement in the Donbass region. So, you know, their credibility is being undermined. They do not have the capacity at this point to do what they're doing in Ukraine and to maintain that, and then to do the same thing outside the Baltic region. So they resort to information operations and attempts to intimidate. But I think the alliance has responded to this with increasing the number of our exercises, improving our structures. So if anything, the alliance is more unified now than I've seen it. And the fact that, as I mentioned, there are 5 countries that are working in Ukraine, 4 NATO countries publicly in Ukraine right now, demonstrates that commitment to countries that are outside of the alliance. The United States is here in Georgia, and we're going to continue to come here to exercise and train with Georgia. Information sharing is at an all-time high. So I'm actually quite confident. Now, Russia does not need provocation. I mean, that is a complete falsehood, that when people say, well, we shouldn't do this because we don't want to provoke Russia, they do not need provocation. They have been the aggressor everywhere. The day after the end of the Sochi Olympics, you know, they invade Crimea. There's no provocation there. They already had their fleet there. It was not like they were being pushed out of Crimea. So I think that their number one objective is to undermine the alliance, to break apart the EU, and to regain what they think they're entitled to as some sort of sphere. And in the 21st century, that just is not, that doesn't work. Nations are entitled to their own self-determination. The United States is committed to helping nations, supporting nations with their own self-determination.
Thank you very much. Final question, and I think we have a solution to the sound problem.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you very much. General, my name is Tamara Chergoleshvili. I'm the director of Tabula Media. General Hodges, you say that the West should raise the cost for Putin. This should be the strategy. Do you believe that the cost is already high enough? Are you happy about the Western strategy regarding Russia? And also, I mean, Russia is waging not only physical conflict, but also an information war. The goal of this information war is not to promote Russia's positive image, but to demonize the West, demonize Western values, demonize Western institutions. How should West be reacting to the information war that Russia is waging, and how especially in the countries that he considers as Putin considers as his backyard? Thank you.
No, Tamara, thank you. First of all, I think you may have said one of the most important, or raised one of the most important points this conference can address, is how does the West counter the Russian narrative in the information space when we're operating from completely different perspectives. President Putin, Minister Lavrov, they do not have to worry about congressional oversight or a parliament that's going to question them. They absolutely do not have to worry about a media that's going to challenge them on what they've said. And so they use information like artillery or rockets without a lot of concern about precision, but a volume. And unfortunately, it does influence certain people how they think about things. In the West, we do want to retain the respect of our own people in democratic society. We do have to deal with a congressional oversight or a parliamentary questioning of what the leaders do. And certainly, we have very active media in all of our countries. So how do you counter that? And the same would be true of ISIL. I mean, this is an organization that videos the cutting off of heads and then broadcasts that, and it works as a recruiting tool. How do we counter that? And I think part of it is, now that we understand the Russian playbook, we understand what they're going to do, we have got to shine the light on that, expose it every time, call it for what it is, and not allow that. Now, I saw at the Munich Security Conference when Minister Lavrov said there are no Russian soldiers in Ukraine. And he also said that maybe the unification of East and West Germany was an illegal act. Everybody in the Munich Security Conference laughed out loud at him. This is at the Russian foreign minister. So I think that people are beginning to understand the use of falsehoods and misinformation, deliberate misuse of misinformation by the Russian government, Russian Federation is beginning to lose some of its effectiveness. But we do have to push back on that. And the president, sir, you talked about the free press or media here in Georgia also. This is an important part of it to counter that Russian narrative. Am I happy? I won't be happy until every nation in Europe has its sovereignty respected, to include Ukraine, to include Georgia. When nations can do what they want, make their own decisions. Nobody has a backyard. The United States, we lost our only war with Canada. So, I mean, the United States doesn't have a backyard or a front yard either. Ukraine is the only place in the world where people died with an EU flag in their hand. Ukrainians made their European decision, and we support that.
Thank you very much. Lieutenant General Hodges, you flew in last night so you could be here this morning, only to turn around and head back to Stuttgart so you can host a dinner tonight. And that itself is, I think, a measure of your commitment to doing what you can, to showing up, to being present, and showing your support. And I think I want to ask everyone to join me in thanking you for your comments and for being here.